Welcome inside the War Room. I'm your host, Andrew Valancourt, and we're back today for episode 99 of the Dynasty War Room podcast. On today's show, we're going to talk about the 2027 rookie class. So it's very much hyped right now. Everyone's talking about it. These draft picks are near impossible to trade for in your Dynasty leagues, and so I figured it would be a good time before we launch into the rest of summer and get into the actual NFL season to discuss the 2027 class, the hype that surrounds it, is it worth it, and how trading might shake out this year with those picks in your Dynasty leagues. So with all that being said, let's cover the basics. As always, make sure you are following this podcast on your platform of choice. We're on Spotify, Apple, YouTube, you name it, we're there. So go make sure that you are following along so you don't miss out on any future shows. And go find us on social media. Twitter or X at Dynasty War Room is going to be the best way to find us. You can find us on YouTube at Dynasty War Room. You can find us on Facebook. We have a Facebook page that you can go like and follow along with. And you can find myself on social media as well at Andrew Vcourt. And I'd be happy to interact with you, answer any questions, discuss future show topics, things that you'd like to see from this show. So with all that out of the way, let's move on into the 2027 rookie class. So most of you have probably either finished or are close to finishing up your various rookie drafts here as we move into June of 2026. And that means with the 26 class out of the way, everyone's attention then turns to 27 in terms of the next round of rookies. So most of the time, the following draft class, there's going to be a bit of a lag in terms of how those picks are valued. So from now on, everyone's looking forward to the season. They're looking to contend. They're going to trade their picks. They're going to get veterans, etc. But so far this year, and we've seen this now for quite a while. The 2027 class, has been hyped up so much that these picks are getting very difficult to acquire, and the 27 class is being valued significantly more than usual classes at this time of year. So right now, according to Keep Trade Cut, an early 2027 first-round pick is currently being valued as the 20th overall Dynasty asset in a Superflex tight end premium league. So 20th overall, that puts that early first-round pick between CeeDee Lamb and Drake London, which are two cornerstone Dynasty wide receivers, guys that have been perennial, all-star level talents, both for fantasy football and in real life. Right now, those players, we're talking second-round startup picks, which of course makes sense given that it's 20th overall, but pretty wild. That is very, very hyped up for a rookie pick, even though it's early. We see from time to time these first overall picks in Dynasty rookie drafts that can land in the second round of a startup draft. Jeremiah Love is somebody that is going, late second round right now, I think, in startup drafts. We've seen it in years past where guys like Bijan was going very early. Ashton Genty last year going early in startups. And Jeremiah Smith in the 2027 class will be another name that goes very high. In fact, he is expected, in my mind, to be a first-round startup pick immediately, which is pretty wild. I don't know that we've really seen much of that, especially considering that Jeremiah Smith could actually be a top 5 startup pick in a Dynasty league. He's going to be someone that is right away like a top 3 Dynasty wide receiver. He is somebody that is going to be in the mix right away with Jamar Chase, with JSN, with Puka, any of those guys that currently are going in the first round of startup drafts. And Jeremiah Smith is going to fit into that group immediately. So that kind of gives you some idea as to why that early first round pick is being valued so highly. But there are more than just there are more guys than just Jeremiah Smith. Obviously, if you're talking an early first, we usually talk in terms of early first, mid first, and late first, or whatever round you want to talk about, right? And typically, I group those into buckets of 4 picks. So the 1 through 4 would count as the early picks, the 5 through 8 picks in a round as the mid, and 9 through 12 as the late round picks. So even if you get the second, third, or fourth pick, you're still having to pay a very, very high price to acquire an early 2027 first-round pick. I would go so far as to say acquiring an early first-round pick is nearly impossible right now without offering up some pretty massive players. Given that we are talking about guys like CeeDee Lamb, Drake London, you'd probably get into the Amon-Ra St. Browns, the Justin Jeffersons, that type of range to be able to acquire an early 2027 first-round pick. If we jump down to a mid-27 first-round pick, currently on Keep Trade Cut, it is valued as the 40th overall asset. So that is right now between Garrett Wilson and an early 2026 first-round pick, Jordan Love, Fernando Mendoza, both right in that range as well. So Fernando Mendoza, I've seen him be the 102 in leagues. I've seen him go as low as 105. Jordan Love, pretty stable, consistent, high end or at least middle of the pack quarterback, of course, in Dynasty long term. And Garrett Wilson has been a mainstay at wide receiver as a solid low end wide receiver one for fantasy football. So to get a mid future first round pick, that's what it's going to cost you right now. And then for a late 27 first round pick, 65th overall on Keep Trade Cut. So that right now is directly between Chase Brown and Dak Prescott. So an RB1 in my eyes, and then a QB who's consistently been solid for fantasy football. He's obviously locked and loaded in as the Dallas Cowboys starting quarterback for the foreseeable future, despite the fact that he's now into his 30s. So that is the price for a late 27 first-round pick. So I think that gives you just a bit of a summary here of just how expensive the 2027 class is currently among dynasty managers. It's been so hyped up that these prices have really, really skyrocketed. So, and this is, again, like I mentioned, very much above where a typical class would be valued at this point in time in years past. So the 2026 class, granted, I think people caught on that it maybe wasn't as exciting, but still was nowhere near these ranges in June of last year. So that's going to be something that's going to impact every single Dynasty League. Trading could slow down. I think there's going to be some ability for managers to take advantage of this trade market, especially if you are someone that has a late first-round pick. I think the value that you're going to get as a contending team for what you can acquire to help you win a championship, which is, of course, the whole reason that we play this game, you're going to have some opportunities to move those late first-round picks and get really good players in return. So that's going to be one way that managers can take advantage of this structure right now in terms of these values. But it's also going to be interesting because there's going to be teams that are so interested in accumulating first-round picks that there's going to be a lot of teams selling off. In fact, it'd be my general advice. If you are not a playoff team in your league, you should be selling big time to try to get yourself as close to that 101 next year as possible. Obviously, it depends on your league. You got to take a look around, see how much you might have to sell to be in that conversation, whether it's there might be one team that is so far worse than everyone else that, hey, they've pretty much got it locked up versus, hey, there's a mixture of 3 or 4 teams that all could be there. It wouldn't take me a whole lot to get into that mix. Could be worth it, especially if you're not a team that is a true contender in your league. So let's take a look at second-round picks right now on Keep Trade Cut. And the 2027 class, an early second, is currently valued as the 102nd overall dynasty asset. That is right between Bashal Tutin and Isaiah Likely and Omar Cooper Jr. So right in that range, Tutin and Likely are the two players right next to that early second-round pick on Keep Trade Cut. But it's interesting that it is currently valued ahead of Omar Cooper Jr., who is consistently going somewhere in the 8 to 10 range of your rookie drafts right now. So I think that just shows you right away, hey, the late round picks from the 2026 class are not even being valued as highly as an early second in next year's draft class. So a mid second round pick in 27 currently 121st overall. That's right between DK Metcalf and Jaden Reed. And then a late second-round pick in 27, 150th overall, right between, on one end, Jonah Coleman and Michael Penix Jr., and then just ahead of Cortland Sutton. So Jonah Coleman, a player that just went early second in most leagues, is being valued behind a late second-round pick in 2027. So I think we're learning two different things. One is that it just goes to show how lackluster the 2026 class has been, but also that is a pretty huge difference, and it shows, I think, the strength, or at least the perceived strength, of the 2027 class at this stage. And then you could even go all the way down to the third round. We won't go all the way into it, but an early third-round pick in 27, 209th overall. That's between, right now there's a cluster of tight ends, Dalton Schultz, Theo Johnson, and then Jerry Jeudy, Alec Ayomanor, Chris Brazzell, who was, depending on your league, somewhere in the second or third round. This is finally where I think we find a little bit more reasonable value in terms of making trades. I do think that there'll be more depth in this 27 class compared to 26, which could make these third-round picks in 27 worth a little bit more in terms of kind of where they're currently going. I think that's at least more sort of equivalent value that makes a lot of sense, whereas some of these first and second-round pick values right now, sky-high prices. It's going to be, you're not going to get as much bang for your buck if you are selling in terms of getting picks back, but at the same time, if you are acquiring players, you can get a lot for your 27 early picks. So with that out of the way, and just kind of that general idea of, hey, people really love this 2027 draft class, let's talk about the actual players that might be available and why the class is being hyped up so much. So with 2027, I think we mentioned Jeremiah Smith, right? He is the projected first overall pick. He is talked about as one of, if not the best wide receiver prospects of all time, at least in recent memory. He is in the Jamar Chase tier. He is probably going to be viewed as above him in terms of prospect rankings. He's going to be viewed better than Malik Neighbors, better than Marvin Harrison was coming out, which says a lot because Harrison and Neighbors were both viewed as extremely good wide receiver prospects. Harrison had some just big time hype as one of these great wide receiver prospects, and Jeremiah Smith is viewed as better than all those guys. So he is 6'3", he can run routes, he's a great separator, he's really just an elite all-around wide receiver, produced immediately as a freshman, was a 5-star big-time recruit coming out of high school, and he should be a top 3 to 5 pick in the NFL draft next year, even with all the quarterbacks that we're about to talk about. So I think one of the biggest differences between 2026 and 2027 is going to be the quality in the quarterback class. Obviously, we had Mendoza this year, and then Ty Simpson a bit further down the list. And there were a number of players that were hyped up the year before that then fell off a cliff. Drew Aller, Cade Klubnik, a number of these guys that were talked about as first-round picks, and then things went south during the college football season, and they were no longer viewed as first-round guys. Now, there, of course, could be some of that again this year. In fact, I would fully expect that to be the case, but right now, at least it appears that we're going to have a better grouping of quarterbacks in the 2027 Dynasty class. So at the moment, we could see up to 5 or 6 quarterbacks go in the first round. It could be much more comparable to that 2024 class where we saw a whole bunch of guys go. Caleb Williams, Jaden Daniels, Drake May, JJ McCarthy, Penix, Bo Nix group. And we could be seeing something similar to that in 27. So right now, as it stands, there are a whole bunch of quarterbacks to keep an eye on this fall. Arch Manning out of Texas is going to be the biggest name I think that people are interested in. He has been hyped up, of course, because of the last name, but struggled quite a bit when he first got on the field at Texas. Now, he picked things up. He played much better as the season went on last year, and he's back again as the unquestioned starter in Texas, where he is, he's more than just a pocket passer. He can move around. He can run the ball a little bit. I think that's what makes him such an intriguing dynasty asset, is not only is he viewed as a high-level college passer, but someone that can use his legs to pick up those all-important fantasy points. So Arch Manning is probably going to be the guy that at least currently is viewed as the potential first overall pick in the NFL draft, assuming he plays well, takes the next step. I think that's going to be a common theme, of course, given that we're a year away, is there's a bunch of guys on here with a ton of potential, a ton of promise. We've seen a lot of good things through the first couple of years of their college careers, but then they have to take that next step into being a truly elite college player, a high-level NFL prospect, that sort of thing. So Arch Manning, he has the age, the height, weight, the pedigree, the name, the genes, everything. So he is somebody that will certainly be in the mix as a high-end dynasty pick should he go in the top 5 of the NFL draft. But there's a number of other quarterbacks besides just Arch Manning. So if he doesn't pan out, or even if he does, there could be a whole bunch of other names. So Dante Moore, who was talked about this year is coming out, being potential number 2 quarterback right behind Fernando Mendoza. He decided to go back to school at Oregon, so he will be someone that certainly is in the mix for a top 10 pick next year. Julian Sayin, Ohio State's quarterback, will be draft eligible next year. A little bit smaller guy at 6'1" compared to some of these other names that are more in the 6'3", 6'4" range, but still very, very accurate passer, somebody that had a very good season last year at OSU. I think he'll need to play better in some of these big games, but again, he was young. He was a big-time recruit. He's going to have a lot of weapons and things to prove this fall at Ohio State. Certainly could be someone in the mix. CJ Carr out of Notre Dame is another guy that is a very high-level pocket passer that has the good size. He's somebody that could absolutely be another first-round pick and would boost this class. Drew Westamaker is an interesting name out of Oklahoma State. He's a transfer from North Texas, and he is a name that has been talked up as, hey, here's another guy that can run a little bit. He's a good athlete. Maybe not as accurate as somebody like a Julian Sayin or CJ Carr, but has the tools to be an interesting and high-level NFL prospect. So he is a name to look out for. Darian Mensah from Miami, who transferred from Duke. He's another guy as Miami continues the trend of picking up transfer quarterbacks. So right away, there's 6 names that are very much in the first-round mix as of right now, but there's several other names that could also end up in the conversation as well. So Lenora Sellers out of South Carolina, he is someone that is much more of an athlete than a quarterback at this point in time. Kind of has a bit of an Anthony Richardson vibe to me. But if he can take the next step, figure out the passing, would certainly be someone that would be of interest to dynasty managers given his athleticism and ability to run. Jaden Maeva at a USC. He is someone that played very well this past year, but now loses his top 2 wide receivers in Jacoby Lane and Mekhi Lemon. So how will he perform? Can he take the next step? Can USC take a next step? So he could be somebody that is in a first-round mix. Trinidad Chambliss at Ole Miss. He is somebody that was potentially going to be in this 26 class before ultimately getting a waiver to return back to school, or I guess the courts helped him out to get back to Ole Miss for another season, which I think is probably good for his development. He's a smaller guy. He only had the 1 year at the power conference level, coming from, Division II Ferris State, but he is somebody that played very well. I think if he has another good season, especially with another coaching staff this year, could definitely get some first round buzz, or at least, early round 2 type of conversation. Brendan Sorsby is another interesting name that is going to create some huge problems for dynasty commissioners and leagues as he potentially enters the supplemental draft, given his gambling problems from his time in college. But he was the Cincinnati quarterback and transferred over to Texas Tech. He went to rehab for gambling. He was betting on his own team when he was a freshman at Indiana. He continued to bet all across the sporting world on anything he could possibly find, which is, of course, why he ended up going to get help. And the NCAA has not given him eligibility for this upcoming season, which for dynasty purposes is a shame because we would like to see him play at a place like Texas Tech before he goes to the NFL. But obviously from a sportsmanship, competitive integrity standpoint, I think that most people are pretty understanding that if you bet on your own team or bet on the sport as a whole, it's going to get you in some hot water. So Brennan Sorsby could be someone that ends up in a weird supplemental draft this summer, which Dynasty Leagues will have to manage. We'll discuss that likely on social media as things get closer as to what the best way to handle that would be. I'm leaning towards the idea of basically a league supplemental draft that would work very similarly to the NFL draft, but that is going to be a problem that we approach later in the summer. Sam Levitt, quarterback, transferred to LSU this year from Arizona State. He's somebody that could bump up the list come draft time. DJ Lagway, another transfer from Florida over to Baylor, same thing. John Mateer, very productive quarterback at Oklahoma. And then Indiana, Josh Hoover, got their transfer from TCU. He's another name that could be in the mix as well. CJ Bailey out of NC State, Drake Lindsey, Minnesota, some other potential names. So there's a lot of interesting quarterbacks in the 2027 class. And I think that is what makes this class, particularly for Superflex leagues, so interesting, is that we have significantly more names that could truly make an impact at the NFL level. There's going to be a lot of NFL teams that need quarterbacks next year, and there's going to be plenty of names here to be of interest to those NFL teams. So the quarterbacks, right now, I think setting the over-under at 5 in terms of first-round quarterbacks seems pretty fair. It seems like most books have it somewhere at 4.5 or 5.5, somewhere in that range. So could we see 5, 6, 7 quarterbacks go in the first round? Absolutely. And then in terms of dynasty, when you got 4 or 5 or more quarterbacks that go in the first round, those are all going to end up being first round picks more than likely in your rookie drafts. So especially if we're talking guys that are not going to be sitting, a couple years ago when we had Michael Penix come out in the first round, it was, he's going to sit for at least a year, if not 2. And Ty Simpson this year, he's going to sit for at least a year, likely 2. So that plays into things a little bit, but we're going to see a lot of guys that get on the field pretty quickly from this class if things play out the way they currently are trending. So we could, of course, see a few of these guys go back to school, but, Julian Sain could be one of those guys, but Arch Manning, Dante Moore, CJ Carr, there's a bunch of names that are going to be dynasty relevant and definitely help this class. The running back class in 2027 also going to be significantly better than this past year. Now, that's not saying a whole lot, but the one downside is, at least at the moment, I don't see a prospect that is necessarily on the Jordan or the Jeremiah Love and Ashton Genty type of tier. I think we've got a ton of guys that would have been far and away the RB2 in this year's class, above of Jadarian Price, but not quite at that Love range. So Ahmad Hardy out of Missouri is going to be probably the top name on the list, and he suffered a gunshot wound at a concert or something of that nature in Mississippi recently, and so that has put his college season in doubt. He was shot in the leg, which, as you would imagine, pretty important if you're a running back. So hopefully he is able to get healthy and recover from all of that and get back on the field, because he is somebody that really exploded on the scene after transferring up to Missouri and was the best running back in college football last year. So he is somebody that will get first-round buzz and would absolutely be somebody in the mix for a top 5 dynasty rookie draft pick next year. So Ahmad Hardy, definitely a name to remember and keep an eye on. Quan Lacey out of Ole Miss is a guy that burst onto the scene last year as well. He is somebody that will has the ability to get into the first round of the NFL draft as well, which of course would make him a first-round dynasty pick. And then there's a lot of names here. I think there's kind of a really solid group of 8 that right now you could just easily pencil in to being day 1 or day 2 NFL pick. And the order and how you want to rank them is totally up in the air. There's going to be a lot of different ways that could go depending on production and the draft and whatnot. But we'll rattle through some of those names here. So Nate Frazier out of Georgia, Mark Fletcher Jr. out of Miami, Jaden Baugh out of Florida, Isaac Brown out of Louisville, And then you got Justice Haynes, who transferred from Michigan over to Georgia Tech. And then Jordan Marshall, who replaced Justice Haynes when he got hurt this year at Michigan, a young running back that showed a lot of promise as well. So those 8 names, I think, are just on their own a significant boost above what we had in 2026. So you're talking at least a handful of those names that are going to go round 1 in rookie drafts, paired with potentially 5 quarterbacks, and then a whole bunch of wide receivers as well. I mean, we're talking, I think, as a whole, we have a very, very good, solid, like at least round and a half of players that are going to be high-level dynasty assets as soon as they're drafted, which is a whole lot more than we could say about this year's class, where we maybe had like a top 10, top 11 of, good players that you felt solid about drafting. Not that you necessarily felt solid about where you had to take those players, but at least, hey, a first-round pick in the NFL or second-round pick, whatever, guys that you felt like there was a reasonable future for. But next year, I think there's a bunch more names where we're going to feel happy to click draft compared to this year. So Lacey, Frazier at Georgia is going to be a very interesting name to watch. Definitely could end up as the RB1. Mark Fletcher had a great playoff run last year with Miami. He'll be another guy that could skyrocket up draft boards. Isaac Brown is a bit more of a speed receiving back, but very explosive out of Louisville. Jordan Marshall could end up being a nice 3-down back. We'll see what that Michigan offense looks like. Justice Haynes had an awesome start to the year at Michigan until he got hurt. He likely would have been the obvious RB2 in the 26 draft class, but the injury, we'll have to see how he recovers. He then goes to Georgia Tech, where he'll be the focus of that offense. So if he can bounce back from the injury and give us a nice season, he will definitely be somebody that has second or third round potential. Jaden Baugh, who played on a very bad Florida team, hopefully will bounce back. Florida as a team will bounce back. Jordan Baugh was the biggest bright spot really on that offense. So he's got a lot of potential. So those are really 8 names that really stand out. Few others just to have in mind as other potential day 2 picks. Darius Taylor out of Minnesota, Hollywood Smothers, who transferred from NC State over to Texas, and then LJ Martin out of BYU as well. Definitely some names to watch. So we should end up with not only a better, significantly more depth, but just a much better second tier of players with those running backs compared to what we had this year, where after Jeremiah Love and then Jadarian Price got pushed up because of the draft capital, but then just this huge gap, I think, between him and the rest of the running backs. I think we'll have a little bit more of a spread out depth and quality of the 27 running back class. All right, so the wide receivers. This is where Jeremiah Smith out of Ohio State, the clear consensus 101 at this point in time, the first-round startup pick as soon as he's drafted, fits atop the list. So there's not a whole lot more to say about somebody like Jeremiah Smith other than every single person in the Dynasty space knows that he is the number 1 player, that he is a game changer as soon as he's picked. And it's going to, again, make that fight for the 101 quite interesting in Dynasty leagues this fall. But there's also a bunch of other names after Jeremiah Smith that should all be interesting and have first-round potential. So the 2 names that I think have the biggest upside potential as being these elite prospects are going to be Cam Coleman out of Texas and then Ryan Coleman Williams, formerly known as just Ryan Williams. He changed his name. It's now Ryan Coleman Williams, which could be a little bit confusing with Cam Coleman. So for the sake of podcast purposes, we'll talk about Cam Coleman and Ryan Williams. And those 2 guys burst onto the scene as freshmen. Coleman at Auburn, Williams at Alabama. Great freshman seasons, and then had okay sophomore seasons. Coleman was fine. Williams definitely took a step back as a sophomore at Bama, and that is something that we're going to be paying a lot of attention to this year. Can Ryan Williams bounce back? Can he show that he is truly elite like he played and looked as a freshman? Cam Coleman, as he transfers over to Texas, can he take the leap from being a good wide receiver to an elite wide receiver in his true junior season? I think that both of these guys can do that. I hope that they can both do that because I think it makes... These are really the 2 players that I think the 27 class kind of hinges on in terms of being a truly elite dynasty class. Because if you can have, multiple first round quarterbacks, right? At least 2 or 3, potentially 4 to 6. That on its own is fantastic to have, multiple levels of high-end quarterbacks in your dynasty rookie draft class for Superflex. So if we just conservatively say 5 first-round quarterbacks, and then we look at the running backs and we say, look, there's 8 names that are likely to go in the top 3 rounds. Let's say at least 3 or 4 of those guys are going to be first or second round picks in the NFL, which may or may not be the case. It could be, 2, could be 3, whatever. But we end up with a handful of those names. We'll say 4 players that potentially are first round rookie picks at the running back position. All of a sudden, with Jeremiah Smith locked in, that's essentially your whole first round. And that's not even getting into the rest of these wide receivers. So if you assume that there's going to be at least 4 or 5 wide receivers that should go in the first round of your rookie draft, this is where the Cam Coleman, Ryan Williams group can really, really, really make a huge difference in how this class looks. Because if those 2 guys really take the next step, bounce back in terms of Williams, and then Coleman take the next step forward, you're talking about the potential 102 and 103 in a Superflex draft, even with 5 or 6 quarterbacks. And then Arch Manning is going to be right in that mix, Dante Moore, etc. So your early 27 firsts, we talk about them being valued 20th overall as a second-round startup pick. It is because of Coleman and Williams and the hope and promise that they can jump back into this elite tier as a prospect. Because then you're talking about 3 elite wide receivers, multiple quarterbacks, several potential first-round running backs, and we haven't even gotten to the tight ends yet, where there should be at least 1, if not 2, first-round guys. So that can really be what makes this class explode and meet the hype. Now, if these 2 guys do not take that next step, do not bounce back, do not become elite prospects, and they're just good or average wide receiver prospects, that is where things start to feel a little bit overhyped for this class unless you really desperately need a quarterback. So Cam Coleman, Ryan Williams, 2 guys to really pay attention to this fall. They currently are pretty widely seen as the second and third receivers off the board at the moment. Then we go down the list, and there are still several other very interesting names. So we look over at Indiana, who had a couple wide receivers in the draft this year in Omar Cooper and Elijah Surratt. They're reloading. They're going to be back. We talked about Josh Hoover at quarterback. He's going to have a couple nice names to throw to. Charlie Becker, their big deep threat guy who came onto the scene late and really was very clutch last year for Indiana if you watch their playoff run. Nick Marsh, talented transfer from Michigan State, heads over to IU. So those 2 names widely talked about as mid to late first-round picks in the NFL. That would certainly put them into first-round range for a rookie draft. And then a couple of other interesting names that stand out. So Mario Craver out of Texas A&M, smaller guy, could be somebody that I'm a little bit scared off of given the fact that he's only 5'9", 165 pounds, but he is a quick elite producer. So somebody that we'll definitely be keeping an eye on. Ryan Wingo at Texas will be the name interesting to watch opposite of Cam Coleman. That Texas offense has the chance to be very, very good for Dynasty, for college football in general, just between those 2 receivers in Coleman and Wingo, and then Arch Manning at quarterback. So that should be a fun offense to watch. Hopefully they meet the hype. Amarian Miller, transfer from Colorado over to Arizona State, can fill Jordan Tyson's shoes there. KJ Duff is a 6'6" receiver out of Rutgers. He's going to be a big X receiver to watch. A couple names out of Clemson, TJ Moore and Bryant Wesco Jr. So depending on how the quarterback situation plays out there with Klubnik leaving, there's a couple of good receivers that will have the ability to enter the draft. Wyatt Young, wide receiver at Oklahoma State, transferred over with Westamaker from North Texas. He could be somebody that is a breakout candidate. Cooper Barkate, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but he also transferred with Darian Mensah to Miami from Duke. So quarterback, wide receiver combos there with these transfers that could be interesting to watch. Deuce Robinson at Florida State is another 6'6" guy. And then Nick Harbor is one of the more interesting names among all players in the 27 draft class. Huge freak athlete, 6'5", track speed, big time deep threat. Frankly, probably would have been a better fit as a defensive end. I know when he was a recruit, he was being recruited by a whole bunch of top schools, and it was a question of, is he going to be a wide receiver? Is he going to be an edge rusher? I think his final two schools, if I remember correctly, ended up being South Carolina and Michigan. Michigan, I think, wanted him more so as that edge rusher, but was going to use him as a wide receiver tight end as well. South Carolina was fully committed to the wide receiver route. That is, of course, what he ended up choosing. And he has shown flashes, but I just don't know if Lenora Sellers is the type of quarterback that is going to be able to get him the ball enough to really have him shoot up draft boards. So definitely has some promise and potential. The hype is there for Nick Harbor, but probably going to be a bit underwhelming. He probably would have been better off transferring to a school with a better passing attack. But nevertheless, he is somebody that will be interesting to pay attention to in terms of players this fall that could end up reaching the first round of Dynasty rookie drafts. I'd be surprised, but hey, never say never. And but at a very minimum, with all these names, you're talking about second-round guys for rookie drafts. That certainly strengthens the second round of a class. I do think that the 2027 second round will be significantly better than the 2026 second-round rookie class, which is really where I think the big drop-off is. The first round isn't as exciting as most years, but at least there are a number of guys that you can look at and see the path and feel good about its prospects, especially at least in the early and mid portion of the first round this year. But looking at the second round and the third round, I mean, the second and third round of the 2026 class, they feel pretty flat. I mean, your mid-second round pick could easily be a mid-third round pick. Whereas next year, I think that's not quite going to be the case. I think we're going to see a much stronger second round. And a lot of these wide receiver names that we mentioned will likely end up in that range. All right, so we got 3 tight ends to mention that are viewed as top 100 prospects at this stage, or at least guys that definitely catch your attention for fantasy. Jamari Johnson out of Oregon is the biggest name. So it could be 2 straight years that Oregon has the first tight end off the board. He is a better blocker than Kenyon Sadiq, but also posted pretty impressive receiving numbers that were similar to Sadiq this year. So he is a name to watch as a both potential rookie first-round pick, but also an NFL draft first-round pick. Trey'Dez Green out of LSU is going to be another name to pay attention to, and then Terrence Carter out of Texas Tech, who's going to be a bit of an older prospect, but definitely has some big-time production metrics from last year, and is pretty shifty for a tight end as well. So those are names to watch, to pay attention to, and Jamari Johnson I think is going to be the most interesting. That'll be a name that people recognize. He's got the typical size, weight that you're looking for at a tight end, 6'5", 257, had 500 receiving yards last year. Green at LSU is a bit of a bigger guy at 6'7", but a little bit underweight, listed at 237. So, interesting for sure. 400 yards and 7 touchdowns last year, and then Terrence Carter with over 600 yards and 5 touchdowns on 55 catches. But he is a little bit undersized as well at 6'2", 245, and then we mentioned the age being a factor there. So he could be somebody that slides up or down, but the 6'2", definitely a concern. So a whole bunch of interesting names. I think that's really the big takeaway from 2027. It is much more intriguing than what we saw in 2026. So we talked about a whole bunch of names at QB. We talked about all the names at running back, wide receiver. I mean, we've gone through enough players where we could fill out a top 36, and have 3 rounds of a rookie draft, and it would be pretty solid. I think people would feel pretty good. So, that in and of itself should be exciting for next year, because there will always be players that pop up that are not being talked about right now. There's always names, especially at quarterback. But really across the board, there will be names that pop up. There will be some names that fall off as well that don't play well. There'll be names that decide to go back to school, especially in the NIL era where you can get paid a pretty good amount of money to go back to college. So this class may very well look completely different from what we talked about today, but at least now at the moment, I do think that the hype for the 27 class is warranted, but I do think there are some windows to exploit that a bit. If you are, a contender and you're looking to trade a 27 first that is expected to be late, I do think you can end up with some pretty good players. But the first and especially early half of the 27 second round class should be pretty strong as well. So if you're somebody that's going to hold a lot of your picks, I currently at the moment, I have mostly contending teams across leagues. I have maybe one or two teams that are definitely in a rebuild, but I've hung on to my 2027 first round picks and second round picks at this point in time. In fact, I'm not sure that I've traded a single 2027 pick across any of my 13 or so leagues. So that's, I think, a pretty good indicator that, hey, I'm waiting to see kind of how things shake out. And maybe at the trade deadline in a league, if I'm really pushing for a title, I'm a contender, I can make a move. But I'm not necessarily looking to go sell off trade away a bunch of first round picks prior to the season getting underway because I want to see what I have. And I love to draft. So that's, of course, something that you have to take a personal consideration into. Hey, 2026 draft, a little bit underwhelming. You really love the rookie drafts. Maybe you want to be fully invested into next year when things are going to be more interesting, more exciting. You want to make sure you have some picks. Hey, that's certainly one way to approach it as well. So won't blame you at all if that's the route that you take. But there you go. That's kind of just a big breakdown, a rundown of the 2027 draft class, why people are so excited about it, names to pay attention to. Maybe you're more of an NFL fan than a college fan, and you just, you want to know some names to watch and pay attention to, storylines. I think there's going to be a number of teams with a lot of high-powered offensive pieces for Dynasty that you should pay attention to. Some of the usual suspects like Ohio State, Oregon, Texas, but Indiana will be back again. Notre Dame is going to have some pieces. Texas A&M, Oklahoma State, definitely some interesting pieces as well. The LSUs, USCs of the world in the mix as well. And then we got some, Missouri, Ole Miss, Louisville, Florida, etc. for some of these running backs. So a lot of fun names to pay attention to. Michigan with their running backs there too. So there you have it. That's kind of our breakdown here of the 2027 class, talking about the hype, the draft picks, how to handle that class as a whole. And if you have specific trade questions, you want to run trades by me, send them over on social media. I'd be happy to post polls, discuss trades, give you my take on, hey, this is the side that I would prefer, whether they prefer 27 picks or not. Always happy to do that. So, you can find us over there on social media at Dynasty War Room on social media. So that's it for this show. We're going to stick to the 2-week time frame for shows. I think moving out throughout the summer, it's just a lot easier to produce quality shows with interesting topics when things aren't so jam-packed on a week-to-week basis. Summer is a busy time, a lot of vacations, things going on. I, of course, work a real job. I do this for fun on the side. So I think that gives me a little bit more flexibility to fit kind of the Dynasty football calendar. But we do have all the shows already planned out. I wrote down, we got everything prepped. We got the ideas. We're going to have some buys and sells. We're going to have some startup rankings, breakouts, busts. And of course, as we get into August, we'll have some bold predictions, a My Guys show. I already have a few names in mind that I'm very excited about for this fall. So it's going to be an exciting summer of Dynasty fantasy football content over here with the Dynasty War Room podcast. And our next show will be show 100, which is pretty wild to think about. So I appreciate you all listening. If you made it this far, shout out to you. Thank you so much for tuning in. And we'll talk to you all on the next show.